Welcome to Diverse Joy, a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions. My co-host is the effervescent Dr. Amber Nelson.
And my co-host is the incredible Dr. William Cox.
And today we are joined by my dear friend, the wickedly smart Valeria Martinez, who is a lawyer specializing in immigration issues. Valeria, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I feel so honored.
So we always start off with something that's bringing us joy. So Valeria, what's bringing you joy this November episode?
I can say that I've made it. So, you know,
How have you made it? Tell the listeners.
after years of trying to go to law school and going to law school and then graduating law school for the sole purpose of becoming an immigration attorney, I'm finally practicing. I'm doing cases. I'm helping people. This is what I wanted to do, and I'm
That's
here.
amazing. Congratulations.
Yes, and that feeling when
Congratulations.
you're calling in life, you're actually getting to do it is just so good. And I'm so happy for you.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know that feeling of like finally getting to that point. You're like, I have been working for so long and so hard for this thing to finally like see it come to fruition. It's just such an exciting opportunity and just chance and place in life to be. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yay.
Enjoy it. The joy you feel with it is well deserved.
Absolutely.
And, you know,
More than earned it.
remember that feeling whenever work gets hard and, you know, you get into the slog of day-to-day like stuff, like always take that moment to step back and be like, this is what I was meant to do. This is what I wanted to do. I worked hard at it, and you'll be able to find that joy again. That's,
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
so good. Yeah, congratulations. And how about Will? What kinds of joys are you experiencing now?
What's bringing me joy?
Yeah.
Well, so this month I turned 40. So that's exciting. And also my specific joy that I wanted to share. So earlier this year, as you both know, I received a 40 under 40 award. I was named one of Madison's 40 under 40, which was a delightful honor. And I'm
huge.
So pleased at that. It was a really cool event. It kind of was like a mini gala sort of thing. There, I got all dressed up in my fancy best, which we'll share a picture of that on the video. And it was just really nice to hear them talk about my accomplishments and all the other 40 under 40 classmates.
Yeah.
We all got to know each other. I got to find out all these people in the business and nonprofit community around Madison, Wisconsin, all the cool different things that these folks are doing.
Yeah.
And
What
then
a cool opportunity to just
Yeah.
like, again, one, be recognized for your amazing work.
thank you.
And also to connect with other people that are doing incredible things in the area. And like, I every time I'm in spaces like that, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, also I feel really honored to be in a space like this, but two, it's really
Yeah.
cool to see who else is doing such great work in the area.
Do you have any celebrations in mind for your big 40?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
So as listeners and viewers, and
Yeah.
as the two of you know, I love to throw big theme parties. So the theme's not going to be too heavy on the theme. It's going to be something along the lines of just kind of be fabulous, be yourself, be fancy, and 40. So have a
Fancy,
big,
free, and 40.
Yeah, maybe I'll name it that. Yes. It's also so the weekend by my birthday is also a full moon. So like Moonlight Madness Freaky 40
I
or
like
something.
it. I like it.
So
Fun.
I'm looking forward to that. And I hope you all be able to come.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Hopefully.
So that'd be good. So what about you, Amber? What's bringing you joy this November?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm wearing my sparkly 40 earrings just in honor of your birthday.
Aw,
so
thank
that's
you.
for you. So one of the things that I started doing, I just turned 39 this year. And so my next birthday will be 40. So I've decided to start doing a 40 new experiences before I turn 40. So it's like 40 before 40. And so I'm just trying to just experience new things. So Renaissance Fair was one of them. I've got like skydiving on there,
Oh my
but
goodness.
I'm not sure if I'm going to do full skydiving or do like chicken out and do like the indoor
Yeah.
skydiving. But just some new experiences and things like, a friend suggested fire walking. And so
Ooh.
I'm going to do that. And, somebody suggested going to the redwoods. So lots of different experiences and things that people have suggested. Also welcome suggestions from you all, the audience, from you guys, or you all, if you have one.
Burning Man.
Burning Man would be, I would love to go to Burning Man. Oh my gosh, that's a great idea.
That's a great
And
idea.
I know people, so we can talk off the. So our dear friends Christine and Mark have been.
Okay.
Christine's been like 6 times, so she like has connections.
Okay. Yeah. You have any ideas? It's
Are
been
you a
really
Coachella
fun.
person on
I've
theme
never
with
been to
the-
Coachella,
Maybe.
so those are great. Those are really great. And that's been like part of
Comic-Con?
I've done Comic-Con before,
okay.
but I have
Alright.
not done San Diego Comic-Con.
Okay.
So if I can
I
get
meant
into
the Comic-Con.
I have never been to the Comic-Con, so if I could get in, that would be, that's, it's a whole lottery and everything, but if I could get into that would be amazing. So that's also been part of the fun of the 40 before 40 is like getting suggestions and recommendations from people of like, what's something that I should try before? I even have like dance classes on there, financial
Never
class.
too late.
I know. I think I got a Groupon for a bartending class
Nice.
to learn how
Alright,
to
so
mixology.
listeners and viewers, we have like 9 months at least until then.
Anytime.
So go to diversejoy.com.
Yes.
Use the little form we have there. It says it's for
Absolutely.
questions and ideas
Yeah.
for the show. The idea for the show can be some of this 40 before 40
it can
for Amber.
absolutely be recommendations
Send them
for me,
in.
please.
Yeah. And she'll probably feel obligated to do them because it came
Absolutely.
from one of you.
Right.
So,
I'll shout you
like-
out when I do them. I'm gonna post them and I have like a little just like a little logo that I'm using that I'm gonna tag onto my pictures for those things on social media as well.
All right, so we'll do, and in our Diverse Joy social media, we'll do like a 40 countdown of your
there we
40
go.
before
My
40.
my
We'll do
40
it. We'll do it.
experiences. I love it. Yeah. So that's been, and just the idea of it and starting to kind of build those up and create, that's been my biggest joy. So
yeah.
Thanks. So, today we've said already, welcome to Valeria. I'm so excited to just have a conversation with you about immigration issues. I'll be honest that as much as I talk about diversity and much work I do in diversity, that the idea of what immigration law is and all of the pieces of that feels really big. And I feel like I know very, very little about it. And yet I know how many people it impacts and how just core to and how much they hold that really close to the chest. And so I'm really excited to just talk through some of the things that you're experiencing, the things that you work with when it comes to immigration and immigration issues.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think I'm a great guest because immigration's all about diversity.
Yes.
And making it joyful.
Yeah.
When you think of immigration, when you think about the diversity that we have here, it's usually, one of 3 things that you're enslaved and brought here, you were already here, or you immigrated, which is the large portion of it. So because of that immigration, we have this diversity that we're here celebrating and continuously celebrating every single day. And unfortunately, it wasn't always about celebrating diversity. You probably won't be surprised to hear that there's a very dark and racist history to immigration. It was kind of flip the coin. It was seen as who do we keep out versus who do we keep in. We had laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act where Chinese people weren't allowed to naturalize. They couldn't come here.
And then once they were here, they couldn't serve in the military and government.
Exactly. And then one law that I was researching about was literally called, the name gives it away, Undesirable Aliens Act.
Yikes.
That was proposed in 1929 by a lovely senator who was...
That was sarcasm, but
That was sarcasm. Yeah, a little disclaimer there.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. And, that act was the law that first proposed making it illegal to cross the border. Before then, and honestly a little bit after then, people came and went as freely as they could. No one was really asking to see papers or anything like that. So that law kind of established the illegality of crossing without authorization. But it was all about trying to keep undesirable people out. So I was reading through the transcripts of the Senate discussions on that bill, and some really disgusting things are being said about the fear of mixing race. And it was, if you look at the context of when this was being proposed, it was the height of the eugenics.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just knowing that, like, with all this wonderful diversity that we have these tainted laws. Like their inception was cruel and horrible.
Yeah.
And one thing we talked about in our previous episode this season that I always like to talk about, so I'm going to bring it up. It's something I talk about as cultural inertia.
Right.
Like, so these things get into our culture, like these laws from the 20s, and unless we do something to change them, the default state is for them to continue. And to continue informing culture, law, and so on.
Right. And, the diversity discussion continues today. In immigration law, there's ways you can take it very, 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 very literally. So fun fact, there is a diversity visa. That's an option.
Yeah.
So the policy motivation behind that is to diversify the U.S. and make sure we stay this melting pot, which I'm sure you've heard in, 8th grade civics.
Right.
So, they have certain country caps and quotas from different countries and countries that tend to see less immigration to the U.S. They'll target those countries and say X amount of people from here. You can apply for a diversity visa. There's a lottery because usually more people apply than get it.
Right.
And then they come. So like there's that diversity in the very literal sense of we're carving this pathway to keep the U.S. diverse.
Right. Just like an intentionality of like, how do we continue to diversify the country on the whole? Just really interesting. I don't think I knew. I never heard. I think I've heard the term of like diversity. What is it called? Visa. Yeah. But I don't think I realized the like intent behind it is to actually keep the U.S. diverse.
And that's really cool. Nice that it's kind of the statement of value that's saying we value this. We want this kind of diversity. That just warms my heart.
Absolutely. And I think when people think of immigration, the first thing they think about is like, oh, I married a U.S. citizen. Oh, my sibling became a U.S. citizen. I can immigrate and become a citizen.
Right.
And so there are pros and cons to the diversity efforts. One of the big cons we're seeing is the caps on different countries. So, like, for example, let's say that you are my sister. You became a U.S. citizen, and you want me to come.
Right.
Let's say I'm from Mexico, which is actually where my people are from.
Yeah.
Well, the Congress has authorized a certain amount of immigrant visas per country. But for the countries that have way more applicants than there are visas available, there's a massive backlog. And this is where you hear about people waiting, like get in line and, all of that. Like, well, the line's 25 years long. Like at this point, we're talking about generational immigration and not immediate
That's the line
solution.
before they can come.
Right.
Legally,
that's the line.
not before they're a citizen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is that downside, but it's, how do we, what is the right solution to this? Because do we want to try to diversify from what countries people come from and keep those caps, but then have certain people waiting like a generation to come? What do we do? So I actually don't have an answer to that.
That is a great question.
You don't have to answer all the questions.
questions.
I do have a question though. So how do they determine the caps for different countries? Is it really just how many people are already here or how many people are trying? Because when I'm thinking about things like bias, I think of like maybe countries where it's mostly people of color, they put a lower cap and they want more people from white countries or something like that. Does that kind of bias factor into it? As far as you're aware? Do you know?
Probably I'm not fully aware. That is actually, I asked my immigration professor that. How do the caps work? And he couldn't even answer it.
Yeah.
Like, If you can figure it out, tell me.
Well, so then that
Yeah.
that to me as a bias researcher,
Right.
I'm like, well, if you don't know how the decision's being made, it's
Then
just
there's-
at least a higher likelihood that bias is
playing
entering
some
the
part.
Absolutely, absolutely.
which is part of why we need the law.
Yeah,
like the
right.
whole point of the law is to get biases out of things. Even before like psychology or cognitive science started
Right.
talking about bias, it was, the ideal of the law
Fairness.
is fairness,
Right.
and not letting bias based on whatever kind of characteristic affect how the law treats a person.
Right.
I'm thinking of other biases too in immigration law with what you mentioned is like, how do we make those decisions?
Right.
More on the tourist side, like not the people that intend to stay, but there are some countries, usually wealthy, Western, not all Western, but definitely wealthy countries that they don't need to pre-apply for a visa to come here. They just show up at the airport and they're let in. And, as U.S. citizens, we have that benefit in other countries too.
Yep.
But, it's not countries like Mexico, Guatemala that have that benefit. It's places like Europe and,
Right.
those wealthy countries. So definitely bias definitely has to play a role in that.
Right. Whether it's explicit or implicit, right? Yeah. One, it makes me think about Muslim bans and like things like that where we start to like limit who can enter in and based on one specific thing, whether it's a country or religion or
Absolutely.
a certain thing, there's lots of reasons for some of those things to come up, but it makes me think about like that and how they stay in place too.
I also, just when we're thinking about these different kinds of bias, different kinds of demographics and things, I also think about LGBT folks who come to the U.S. seeking asylum, coming from a country that, like Uganda, to call one out, that is very horrible for LGBT folks. But then if they get denied when they're here, if they get sent back to their country, they will get killed in some cases at least, or at least face jail and things like that. Obstacles to the joy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, it makes, we talk a lot about media, but it makes me think of, it's a fictional show, but the show's called Sex Education. And there's a character who is from an African country. I want to say it was Uganda, but I can't remember for sure. And when he goes home and he's gay, he's a queer identifying person, and he goes and visits his family and just figuring out like, how do I be here and visit and like not signal to people that like that maybe I'm queer, and like how do I go about this, but then finds this whole community of people that are like underground. But the really real fear of even just going and visiting, and will he be able to like leave and come back home, and will he get caught in the middle of that, just if somebody dares to perceive him a certain way.
And that ties into, I'm just repeating something Valeria said at the start, but this notion of joy in immigration. When someone's immigrating, they're either immigrating away from something bad to try to pursue happiness,
right?
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, quote the U.S. Coming towards joy, and then hopefully in an ideal world, the legal system would be helping them with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I just found out that this show has an amazing researcher working live.
Yes.
And it's this magic guardian angel that can answer all your questions, Will.
Oh, yes.
And per the Immigration Act of 1990, each country is allotted 7% of available green cards for family-based and employment-based immigrants. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but
definitely
thank you, Erica Roman-Binding, for your research. There's this thing called the internet where you can find stuff out.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
kind of touching back on like asylum seekers, which you were mentioning, it's interesting to think about like how we conceptualize them and how that idea has changed over time. Particularly, like for example, so internationally, a little bit of international law, there is the Refugee Convention, which the U.S. signed and ratified. We are one of many nations to agree that it is our legal duty, and we ascribe to this duty to accept asylum seekers. But there's these interesting pieces by scholars like Susan Kneebone who noticed this pattern of certain countries kind of decoupling the duty aspect of granting asylum and seeing it more as a extra legal or kind of like a little token, a little gift thing. And that process then now we're thinking of asylum as just this humanitarian thing that the US could do instead of a duty that we have. That we've legally
like
signed on to.
versus a duty.
Exactly.
That feels like not helpful.
Yeah.
That feels negative to me. Like I'd rather
it be a duty.
I'd rather it be a duty. You know, I think that sometimes when it comes to diversity work, people don't want to make progress. You know what I mean? Like the people
tough.
Is comfortable. And so
that's the inertia.
Right. That's the inertia piece. It keeps it in place. And so if there's a duty, there's something that like you have to do this whether you want to or not, or whether you think it's right or not, it's gonna move us in the direction of progress, even if your attitude isn't in the right place. You know, I talk about that. Yeah, it's a form of commitment. I think about it like when we think about behavior change, or if I'm working with kids and doing like behavior management, like they don't have to be happy about changing their behavior. They just have to do it. They just have to come. There has to be that compliance piece, right? And so there's a part of that that's like that kind of going into like, oh, this is kind of a token or something we can. It's like a higher moral calling, essentially, that then leaves a lot of, it feels to me, and again, I'm not in law at all, but there's something about that feels like there's so much area that can be gray, that gives too much to the goodwill of people.
Absolutely.
And I want to believe in the goodwill of everybody, and not the people are selfish.
Well, like
they're self-serving.
Like this idea of these ideals, like, you know, on the Statue of Liberty, it says, give us your tired, your poor, and so on. That's not a legal document. That's a cute poem. I mean, a beautiful. It's a beautiful, meaningful
poem and value.
But without the duty, without the commitment, it's just words, not a commitment.
Right.
We want to move from words to actions. I do think that is an ideal of our country. Politicians will use the Statue of Liberty 100%. Inscription to talk about things, but if you don't follow that through with action, with this duty, it's just words, not actions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the people emigrating themselves, like, so there was this really also another interesting study by Emily Rio, where she looked into how like why migrants migrated. And here's a very particular definition that I'm using here: migrants versus refugees. So refugees.
I don't know. I mean, I might know the difference, but
yeah. So refugees, it's a very, very, very particular definition. A refugee is someone who is fleeing their country out of the fear of persecution because of like 5 very specific enumerated things. So race, religion, political opinion, membership in a particular social group, nationality. So like if you're fleeing because someone's trying to kill you, but it's not because of one of those, you're not a refugee. It's illogical, and it was a definition that was created post World War II as a response to the migration crisis happening there, where we saw people being persecuted because of their ethnicity, because of their religion. That today, I mean, that still happens, but that's not. It doesn't solve the many new reasons why people are fleeing. Like we are seeing a lot of economic migrants, climate refugees, which that's not also technically not a thing, because fleeing because of your climate and the destruction of your environment is not one of the 5 things. But
rising ocean levels are affecting people in Micronesia and other island nations, in a very catastrophic way.
So migrants is sometimes seen negative. It's like, oh, they weren't fleeing persecution. They chose to leave. Like, yeah, but you chose because you had all these other terrible things to leave.
Yeah, exactly.
I think in terms of like self-perception and also how Americans perceive a lot of migrants. So I mentioned earlier that it is illegal to cross the border without authorization. Most of the time that's not prosecuted, minus a few years where we did. But so this study, she interviewed a lot of these migrants, and there's like a moral. They saw like migrating. Sure, they knew it was illegal, and so therefore the logic is you shouldn't do it. But they saw it different morally. Like they weren't criminals. They were here to help the U.S. because they need people working there. Like they saw themselves as a net benefit to the country.
Interesting. Yeah.
And if you ask the average American, they are going to say that like crossing the border without authorization is morally different than like a bunch of other immigration laws. So it's just interesting to see the conceptions people have of migration. So like this choosing to come versus fleeing, but like really fleeing.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to take a little break now, and we will be right back.
Okay, yeah. So welcome back from break. And, every episode we tend to kind of sandwich in a positive and kind of negative story, usually related to our theme, sometimes not. But I know you had a few stories about kind of the topic and idea of immigration. And I'd love to hear more about like your story and the stories that you have to share with us.
Yeah. So my parents immigrated from Mexico probably 30 some years ago now. And they, it was rough in the 1980s and the 1990s. And, just you appreciate their struggles when they tell you these stories that, you didn't really necessarily know as a kid. But as you get older, they start to confide things in you. And one of the things was, so like they were the immigrant family from Mexico in their workplace. And their workplace had insurance, and they applied for insurance, and my mother was pregnant, but there was like animosity between the people already there and like this new immigrant family that's like new to this company. Well, when they submitted their application papers for the insurance, the HR person, whoever it was, like didn't like my family, and he never forwarded up. So my mom had to pay out of pocket for her birth. Because the guy didn't like send, and like that was just so hateful. And then when I hear stories about how hard it was for them to buy a home in Kenosha, like the real estate agent at first kept like trying to force them into neighborhoods they didn't want to be in. It's like, and so they ended up like kind of ditching that person and then finding a nice home where I grew up in a mostly white area. They were, when they first moved in, they were like the only immigrant family. Now there's more, and now it's more diverse. And also now you get they were like the young couple with a small family. Right. And everyone else was kind of older, white, retired. Yeah. But now like they're the old people in the neighborhood. But yeah, just like hearing those stories, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize it was that bad just less than 30 years ago.
Not that long ago.
And it makes me think, your parents, refused to accept what the realtor was trying to push them to do, which takes a lot of strength, and not everyone can do that. Yeah. They will get kind of pushed around and accept something that they don't want for themselves. And so I think of all the families who are then pushed into neighborhoods they don't want to be in, or jobs or other things as well. So I'm glad that your parents found that strength and stood up for what they wanted and gave you the life you deserve.
For sure.
No, again, it makes me think of like, redlining and that history.
Do you want to explain redlining in case someone doesn't know?
Yeah, I will say that I'm not the best at explaining it, but really where there were laws and restrictions of where folks can live and can't, and specifically kind of drawing literal red lines in certain neighborhoods that would designate certain neighborhoods as like undesirable, right? And those undesirable neighborhoods were where Black and brown folks could live. And if, a Black or brown person would try to live in one of those other neighborhoods, sometimes then we would have things like white flight, where white folks would move out of that neighborhood and then it would get redesignated and new red lines would kind of be drawn to kind of, again, exclude Black and brown people from areas that have kind of economic growth and access and just resources. And so this sounds, even it was very prominent in the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s. And so to hear, it's still very prominent. Let me make that very clear.
There's
It's still very prominent. It still happens. But to hear your family going through that, I even know like my brother buying a house in Portland, that there was a lot of exclusionary laws, that some of the houses that he was looking at, the deeds still said that like Black folks can't live here, cannot own.
How is that not illegal? No.
It is illegal, but that doesn't mean people went back and deleted the clauses.
it.
So you should check. Well, you should check your house. If
Wow.
you can go to like your city hall and kind of look back at the history of the property and see if there's a covenant, which is basically a fancy word for a contract, a sales contract. Yeah. And it'll say like whoever buys this home cannot sell it to a Black family. Yeah. And that might still be in your like property history. It's just not valid because of Supreme Court case law after that. Or actually,
Wow.
I think it might be federal law, but the words are still there.
Still exist in so many properties. I would imagine nationwide. But
my thing to harp on, the cultural inertia, like the stuff gets put into the laws, it stays there unless you go back and go through it and weed it out.
And ask the questions and exactly, and pull it out.
Wow.
But to hear your family, right? Like just this really close connection, and that they fought back and were like, no, this is where we're gonna be. This is great. Yeah.
Well, so we always do kind of one more negative story that has kind of some of that to it. And not that we want to gloss over the negative things at all. We always, but we do want to look forward to what can be done better and what we can feel good about. So you also have a more kind of positive story that you wanted to share.
I do, yeah. So my positive story, well, it's not really a story. It's more of just a
trend or
trend.
things that have happened.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I feel like I've made it. So like when I like am able to make a difference in someone's lives. Like I'm helping people like my parents. I'm helping people like my, my community. So it's just very rewarding when you win. And even if it's a minor thing, like, oh, well, you know what? You're not a permanent resident or a citizen yet, but here's a work permit. You can work legally. Here's a social security number. Guess what? You can get a bank account. You can get a driver's license. You can maybe buy a house if the lender will allow you to. Like all of a sudden, just seeing a small change, it's like, sure, you don't have like full status, but this little thing just changed your life.
Right.
So just the joyous part is like, yes, I know about all this poor history and it touches personal aspects of my life, but like I'm able to do something about it, and it's very rewarding.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, kind of putting a point on it, successful immigration work like you are doing. I mean, it literally saves lives and reunites families. And I just think that's so beautiful. And so joyous. And
the asylum
so happy that you're doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, the asylum cases are so rewarding. It's like these people are literally going to be harmed if they return to their country. So winning that is just knowing they're safe. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your important work.
No kidding. I was gonna say, and it's something that seems so small, I think, that we take for granted as U.S. citizens, is something that, again, is so life-giving for folks that don't have that. Like a social security number, right? That was something that I'd never really thought of until I had a friend who was undocumented and like didn't have a social security number in their family. And when he got his number, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know. Like even as somebody I've known you for years, and I didn't even know that you were undocumented, or that you didn't have a social security, and like how difficult that was, and to hold that secret and what it requires. And we mentioned earlier, but just the work of like, it requires a lot of trust in people, but their lawyers and folks around them, because you have to hold it. There's so much fear associated with not being a citizen. And so, I mean, again, even in that instance, like I've known this person for years and I had no idea that they were undocumented, or they didn't have papers, they didn't have things, and they had to work so hard to protect themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's scary. Like, some people are very open about it. Some people are not. And it's understandable because once that's out there, there are repercussions, both social and, well, there already
Potential,
are legal repercussions, but
Right.
it's, people look at you differently.
Yeah.
They assume things of you. They maybe,
Mm-hmm.
it's very powerful for
Yeah.
that person to have come out and said, hey, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's incredible work that you get to bring them to that place. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Well, next segment that we always do, we like to have a question. Those of you in the audience, if you have questions you'd like to see us address, please, you can submit them at diversejoy.com. There's a little form when you're on that landing page for submitting questions, and we'll get to them in a future episode. But for this episode, since we have an immigration lawyer here, we thought of a question that we can use as a jumping off point to discuss. So what should people look for in an immigration lawyer? And this can be either someone who themselves is working on their own immigration, or maybe someone who's a citizen and wants to help someone, any of the above. So what should people look for in an immigration lawyer?
So the thing with immigration law is that it's very word of mouth driven, which I think a lot of areas of the law are as well. Yeah. But particularly immigration, because these are sensitive topics, because these are things that people don't want to be open about for valid reasons. A lot of the, I guess, advertisements, not really advertisement, is word of mouth. Yeah. So I think when you are looking for an immigration attorney, ask around. If you're undocumented, I'm assuming you know some undocumented people around you. And just hearing about their experiences, because like those personal references really do mean a lot in immigration law. It talks to their experience. It talks to how they treat their clients. I think, lawyers get a lot of bad jokes and often deserved. So to find someone that like doesn't have an ego, that actually wants to help you, that explains things to you when you're confused. Too many attorneys, they think they're too smart to explain things to their clients, and that's absolutely
use the legal jargon and legalese.
Yes, and understanding that having an attorney that really lets you be in the driver's seat, or at least the passenger seat for sure, in a lot of the process, telling you everything as it's happening, explaining it to you clearly. And those things, that's really word of mouth. I'd say ask around, ask about reputation, because that matters a lot in immigration law. Since these are things that we don't really publicize, these are things we talk about just with intimate friends and family.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, that makes a lot of sense. Again, requiring a lot of trust in somebody, that if you heard from someone else, like asking around, does anybody know a good immigration lawyer? Do you know anybody that has gone through this process, and being able to kind of gather that information from folks who have had that firsthand experience is probably the best gold star that you can get. And there's part of me that maybe this is my own bias, I'm just gonna call it out, that I imagine that a lot of folks that go into things like immigration law probably have a really good heart of like wanting to like help people stay and work through that. And so that's my own, again, I'm calling out my bias here, but I also think that like somebody that has the motivation and heart to go into this likely has a heart for people to stay. But then also, again, hearing directly from the people that, because even people that have good intentions, don't always have the best impact on people too. So even going into it with the best intentions doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best either.
Yeah, I mean, a similar analogy is like, well, doctors probably get into medicine wanting to help people, right? But in one of our episodes last season on medical bias, we were talking about even with that as the assumption, the practice of it isn't necessarily borne out. So
I would say if you're in a room with the lawyer and you feel like they're being condescending, run, because they don't trust you with your own life. This is about you.
Yeah, that's good.
We want it to be empowerment, not talking down to you. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's really good. I appreciate that. That's really great. Excellent. So another one of parts of that we do in our podcast is that we come back to the habit breaking habit breaking bias training. Sorry.
Bias habit breaking training.
You know what?
You got all the words.
Listen, the words were there, friends. It's been a long day. The words are there.
Training to be biased.
We're training people to how to be biased. The bias habit breaking training. And so we bring in skills specifically from that training. And so, Will, what is our skill for today?
So our skill falls under the tools components. So how we can work on reducing bias and creating inclusion. And the tool is called Broadening Your Input via Contact. So a lot of the ways we learn biases in the first place is by getting very narrow input, especially from things like the media or our social environments. Mm-hmm. They teach us these kind of narrow stereotyped assumptions and ideas about members of different groups. And one way to fight back against that is by broadening your input, trying to get more and better exposure to people's real lives, real experiences. There are a number of ways to do this. One is through the media, which we talk about every week at the end when we have our media recommendations. But I'm going to focus specifically this month on broadening your input via contact with actual people. And I want to be clear, this is about seeking out kind of genuine interactions with folks. This is not walking up to the one Mexican person in your work group and being, hey, will you be my new Mexican best friend? Because I'm trying to check a box.
Teach me about your culture.
No, it's not.
Don't do that.
It's not about using someone else as a tool to fix your biases. But what it is about is opening yourself up to interactions with people who you might not by default assume that you have a lot in common with. So research consistently shows that across racial group boundaries, ethnic boundaries, sexual orientation boundaries, people are actually have much more in common than different. And this is especially true when it comes to the sort of things that we do for fun, the things that we enjoy doing in our spare time. If you like watching sports or playing video games or Disney, like Amber likes to talk about all the time, pretty much anyone you meet, one of the things you enjoy doing in your free time, you'll be able to find something in common with any person you meet. But people tend to assume the opposite. They assume, oh, you're of a different race than me. We're not going to have anything in common. So they don't even try. They're not even open to it. And when I do the training for our clients and audiences, actually, I use the story of how Amber and I met as a way to unpack this. And so, Valeria, you've never heard how we met. So we'll use that. And then I also have a Valeria story that I can bring up about why this is so beneficial. So when Amber and I met, many wonderful years now, it was at a conference. So Amber was part of a team that was organizing this conference. And, for me, it was a gig. They were asking me to come. They wanted the bias habit breaking training. I was excited to be there. But also, it is work for me. And so, at this conference, they had a special social hour where they wanted all the keynote and big speakers to come and meet together. And when you've been traveling all day and you have to have a big speaking engagement the next day, that's the last thing you want to do. So I kind of had to drag myself to it. I was like, oh, great. I guess I'll be a good colleague and come meet these people. And luckily for me, that's what I did. And at this social hour, I got to meet my wonderful friend Amber. On her phone, she had one of those little pop sockets. And what it was a Wonder Woman thing. And that was the one small thing we connected on. I was like, oh, you like Wonder Woman? I like Wonder Woman too. And we started talking about Wonder Woman and comic book movies. And I'm sure went on to Disney and Pokemon and everything else. Basically, the more we talked, the more we found that we had in common and became closer and closer to now we have a podcast together. Right, yeah. And she's one of my dearest, bestest friends in the world. Some of my colleagues joke with me when I tell this story. They're like, well, basically, you're just teaching people how to make friends. You're like, you find one thing you have in common and then you build on it. And you know what? That is exactly what I'm doing. Unapologetically, unabashedly. It's good for us to have that reminder because all it takes is finding that one thing in common to start a friendship. You're not going to be best friends with everyone you try to meet. I wasn't looking for, I need a new black friend. Like, no, but it was, I was open to it and it happened. And it does a number of important things for us. So I'm friends with Amber because I adore Amber. We have stuff in common. We have fun. I mean, this whole podcast is an example of why we're friends.
Right.
But let's say I'm ever in a situation where I might be prone to express bias towards some other Black woman, who's someone I hadn't met before. Biases are still going to come to mind. Like, we can't ever fully erase them. But what also comes to mind is my emotional connection to Amber and all the stuff that we've shared, and other Black women in my life. So broadening my input via that context, having that meaningful relationship with Amber pushes back against those biases. It makes it less likely that the bias is going to influence my behavior, my judgments, and so on.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I think for me, growing up in a predominantly white space, thinking about that from the opposite end of me also providing a positive experience with somebody, being very intentional about how I interact with people as well, was also a really big part of how I grew up, because there was a very single story about Black folks and BIPOC folks. And so a part of my own upbringing, not that it was intentionally embedded in me, but that was part of my own understanding of myself. Was I want to be able to give them that one experience that they can go back and say oh, well, maybe not all Black people.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, we do have, there was this interaction that I had, or there were these times, and not that has to be everybody's story. That absolutely is not everybody's job to take that role on. But I know that was something for me as I was navigating those spaces that I really clung to that kind of identity of how can I be that person? How can I be the person that helps to create a different experience and different perception of people that are different from them? Yeah. And
there are other specific, more knowledge-based things that where this can come into play. And so I have a story about Valeria. I don't know if you remember this.
I have no idea. The look on her face is
I didn't warn her about this, but it's all positive, I promise. So this was many years ago. I don't remember the exact context, but there was something where I needed to talk about undocumented immigrants, except in the context and at that time in our culture, it was calling them illegal immigrants. Yeah. And I just knew that was wrong. Yeah. I was this is not I know that's not how I want to say this. I think I was teaching a class and this was one of the topics I wanted to cover. And even in the research paper, yes, I'm remembering it. Even in the research paper, they were talking about illegal immigrants, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. And as someone who wants to be inclusive in their language and all, I was I know this is wrong. And I talked to Valeria about it. I was what? I feel wrong. I know this is wrong to say illegal immigrants. And she was well, undocumented. And I was oh, of course. I think that's more widespread now in culture. At the time, it was a little new, even to me. And I even said to Valeria at the time, I don't know if you're remembering this story. I don't remember this. I was I hope you know, I'm not just coming to you because you're Mexican American. I'm coming to you because you are involved in these issues. Right. You think about these issues, and I respect your perspective. So it's not just, I've got a Mexican American friend.
I'm assuming at that point too, we were already friends, and there was trust and confidence between us. So yeah.
But if there's a similar issue with Black related things, I might come to Amber, one of my other. Having those people in your life and having that relationship makes it safe where you can ask some of those things where you're I don't really understand why this person maybe was offended by something I said. I don't get it. Please, help me learn. Not I have this friend so I can use them to. Yeah. It's a friendship, a genuine connection, and then also you learn from one another. Because that's what all friendships are. We learn from one another.
100%.
You know what I learned from you? Totally unrelated. But I don't know if you remember this moment. But so, being a first generation American and also first gen college student, grad student, everything, I didn't realize that PhD stood for Doctor of Philosophy. And I was wait, I thought you studied psychology. And then you corrected. And that was kind of my introduction to academia. It's no, this is what this actually is.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. That's really cool. I'm glad
after you made fun of me a little bit, but
but also our relationship. We have jokes and teases. All right, I have one more story, not about someone on the podcast right now, but it relates to the immigration thing and actually Valeria's story about her parents. Again, I do this training and I have audience members who tell me their stories. Someone emailed me a couple months or something after they'd been through the training. And what they said was they lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. And a Mexican immigrant family moved in down the street from them. And normally whenever someone moves in, they go and like introduce themselves and bring the kids and welcome someone to the neighborhood. But when this family moved in, the thought that went through this guy's head was like, these Mexican folks, they don't want some white people coming to bother them when they're trying to move in and all this kind of stuff, when they wouldn't have thought that when it was a white person. Right, it's again, this idea that because someone's different, they don't want an interaction with me. But, and this is a little humble brag on my part, the way he said it, he was like, but then all that stuff you were saying in the training, like I heard your voice like say, don't assume someone doesn't want to have an interaction with you. It's about being open and just giving a try. Maybe they won't want to interact with you, but it's about being open to it because you never know how much you're going to have in common. And he was like, oh, crud. This is exactly what that guy was talking about. I'm having these thoughts that would, and I was like, nope, right now. And he got his wife and kids together. They went over there to welcome this family. Turns out they had a lot in common. The kids were of similar ages and they became, he described it as they became family best friends. Like their families became best friends. Also, his family was the first family in the neighborhood to come and welcome this Mexican family to this predominantly white neighborhood. And after they did that, all the other families kind of saw and they were like, oh, crud, we should have done this. And so it set off like a domino effect of inclusion where everyone came to welcome them, which might not have happened if he hadn't been the one to overcome that little kind of hesitation or bias.
That's beautiful. I think my parents were on the other side of that. And our front neighbor, Marilyn, was kind of that person. So that's beautiful. Like, you're helping families like how mine was.
And this is something that these habit-breaking skills, all of them that we talk about, have that kind of side potential that when you start doing something differently in a better way, other people who see you do that, you're setting an example for them to follow as well. So these things have recursive effects. We're all working on making the world a better, joyful, more joyful place.
That's great.
Have either of you had, friends that you learned something from other than the stories we've already shared, like where being with an LGBT person, you found some different perspective or someone from another country that you want to share? And if you don't, Roman can just cut me asking that.
I mean, I don't have anything specific. Just other than lots and lots of examples of meeting people that have different like religious perspectives or religious backgrounds and different, everything that I can just sit and start to ask build relationships and then learn so much more. And I think, again, going back to my own personal lived experience of trying to take on the like space of wanting to be somebody that gives somebody else a new experience with a maybe a Black person, taking that in and saying like, I want to provide that to somebody else and give them the opportunity too. So I think just lots of relationship building with people that I actually do see as maybe potentially different, but looking for those things that are similar. So nothing like, not a specific example, just I love meeting diverse folks, people that are different, that I wouldn't necessarily expect to have something that we have similar identity markers,
And so you have diverse joy.
I get a lot of diverse joy. Yes. Yeah.
The thing that I thought of was some of my gay friends teaching me drag terminology.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That was always fun.
Yeah. That is fun.
Awesome.
That is fun. I love that.
Well, so go out there, folks, make friends, find that kind of diverse joy because if you have people in your life with different perspectives, they can give you those different perspectives, either because you asked for them or sometimes because maybe they observe and think, hey, I can share something with you. Wonderful thing. All right. So, as always, we like to end with a joyful recommendation. It's always great when we have a guest and we get to hear about maybe some kind of media or media thing we haven't heard before. So, Valeria, tell us about your recommendation and why it brings you so much joy. And we're dying to hear about it.
Yes, I am recommending the K-drama, K for Korean drama, The King's Affection. And in general, I recommend foreign dramas. If you only watch American television, you need to branch out. There is so much
broadening your input.
Broaden your input with the other media. Exactly.
There's so much joy and storytelling throughout the world that like watching foreign media, helps you discover. of course, don't always take everything as literal because media has its issues with representation.
100%.
But yeah.
And it can, sometimes it's not necessarily that you learn something, but you find a question you didn't know you wanted to ask.
Absolutely.
Like, wait, what's going on here?
Right.
Like there's some Japanese horror movies that I like, and they get kind of abstract in a weird way. And I'm like, I don't think I understand what's going on here. So I have to go and read up, and they're like, oh, well, in Japanese culture, there's this context and that context that they would understand being from that makes the movie make sense. And I'm like, oh, now I see how it clicks. And it's cool. So it can be questions, not just answers.
Right. So watch foreign media in general. It's fun. But The King's Affection is great because it takes all the boxes. It's got action. It's got romance. It's got historical drama. It's got a strong female lead. It has like a little queer moment. And it's like contextually important because Korea is a very conservative society. So like that's a great thing that they have in there. It has comedy. The plot's great. So I think there's just a little bit of everything for everyone, and
I love that.
brings me joy.
So speaking of K-dramas, just so I actually haven't watched a K-drama yet. I know there's a lot of them on Netflix, right?
There's a lot.
Is King's Affection on? Is that where you watch it? All right. So listeners and viewers, check it out on Netflix. My parents, so maybe this will be one of my joys in a future episode, but Roman and I recently had a little trip with my parents, and they sat us down to tell us about K-dramas. Like they were like, you know what we like? It's K-dramas. And they explained they
love that.
It has that cultural aspect where, you know, my mom, as our listeners know, is Chinese, Hawaiian, Portuguese. And so there's a little bit of like kind of getting in touch with Asian cultures, not just K-dramas, also J-dramas. But she really likes kind of parsing the cultural things, and they were sharing that with us, how they really like getting into that and thinking through all the cultural differences and similarities, of course. So
yeah, I've never really watched K-dramas either. Occasionally when I visit my bestie in Hawaii and her family, they watch K and J dramas. And so I'll watch them when I'm there, but I haven't really watched them. So I'm really excited. I'm going to have to go in and watch The King's Affection.
I have to give you a little disclaimer though. Once you watch one, you get hooked.
I have heard that.
Well, see, do you know do you realize what you've done now? Like we have had letters and people telling us to our face. They actually do listen to our recommendations.
Right. They really?
And so you just created like a
ripple effect.
A ripple effect of
watch a spike in the K-dramas.
We'll have a diverse choice spike in Netflix ratings for K-dramas this November.
Get royalties.
Right? I love that.
Oh,
that's great. Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah.
The King's Affection.
All right. Well, I'm Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
And today's guest,
Valeria Martinez.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Binding with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts, or at diversejoy.com. Also check us out at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally. Just like Valeria was saying with lawyers, word of mouth is the #1 way that podcasts reach new viewers. So talking it up to people will really help us out. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy. Bye. Woo.
Is that a dog training thing?
Yeah.
I was like, why do I recognize that?
We need our clicks.
All right.